All right, afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining the Lunch and Learn today, which is being co-opted again by our good friends over at the perfSONAR developer team. They have graciously given us some time today to hold open office hours, and that definition can mean a couple of different things. It could be people who have questions can identify themselves and ask their questions. You can ask to see demos. You could ask for advice on how to set stuff up, whatever really makes sense. And Andy and Mark are here, and we may even get a couple other perfSONAR developers. But I'm just going to throw it over to them and let them sort of lead things. Everybody has the ability to unmute and mute yourself at will. So please make sure you're doing that, and then you can just use your hand to identify yourself. So take it away, Andy and Mark.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jason. Yeah, so I think a lot of you have been to our previous sessions that we've had of these. We've been trying to do them once a quarter. But for those of you who haven't, like I said, we like Jason said, we keep it pretty open. So if you have questions or a topic, feel free to throw stuff in chat. Also just feel free to speak up. It's a lot more fun when it's not just Mark and I talking, I think. So yeah, feel free to speak up on the audio. And yeah, we don't really have any set agenda, so we kind of leave it up to you. Maybe while you're thinking of questions and things like that, one quick plug I will make is in December at the Internet to Technology Exchange. We will be doing a perfSONAR training, an all-day training. I believe it's on the
It's on
Monday.
the Monday, yeah.
So it's all day. It'll be a combination of, getting perfSONAR kind of configured, and then also we'll spend some time like in Grafana building like custom Grafana dashboards and things like that. So leveraging a lot of the stuff that came out in the June 5.1 release. So even if you've done a perfSONAR training before, there's probably a decent amount of new stuff, yeah, in there. So just want to give that a quick plug if people are getting their travel plans around or thinking about going to that. So the training, yeah, so sorry, the Internet to Technology Exchange, it's in early December. I should probably have the dates
I
up. It's
think
in
it's the week of
Boston.
December 5th in Boston.
Yeah, week of December 5th in Boston. And so I'm guessing Monday is December 5th. That Monday basically is the day we'll have the training. So I mean there is when you register for the conference, I believe there is a checkbox, there's a separate registration for the perfSONAR that should show up during the registration process for you if you're interested in doing that. So yeah, so I'll
And
just give it a minute for people to ask questions.
and like the revolution, this training will not be televised.
Oh,
No, I'm sorry, it's December 9th through 13th
oh, okay.
in sunny Boston.
Well, if it's like here, you never know. Like
That's
especially
true, yeah.
could be something. Could be buried under a foot of snow, but or more.
I know Phil has to have a question.
I'm a poacher.
Oh, I was thinking other Phil. Sorry, I didn't realize there were two Phils in here. Oh,
As a matter of fact, I do have a question. Uh,
you're so dependable, Phil. Thanks.
One may even say more than one. Uh, I'm going to zip it into the chat. Maybe you can take it one at a time.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a good size pile.
Yeah. So
All
I was
right.
waiting for others to chime in, but if no one else is.
All right. Well, let's see. I guess I'll take the first one. The second one looks like an Andy question. So the question was there's a for those that don't know, pscheduler has this nice command called monitor. That's a lot like top that shows what pscheduler is up to. And Phil's question is basically, is there a way to filter out some of the output? Um, and the answer to that is kind of no, not really. It is something I've thought about wanting to do, or I've wanted to do for a while. Um, but it hasn't been real high on the priority list.
I asked because it just fills up my whole monitor. I can't see any other tests.
Well, clearly, Phil, you need a bigger monitor.
Well, there's that. Yeah, clearly. Okay.
And then I can take the second one. I was trying to pull some stuff up while Mark was talking that I can help show. But anyway, so you're talking about the growth of the data. So I think one observation that a lot of people have made too is of the bulk of the data is, so now in 5.1 you've got all your measurements, and then also by default you grabbing like the host metrics as well and storing that. And it actually grabs like quite a few host metrics, and that actually seems to be the bigger, because it grabs it pretty frequently too. That seems to be the bigger user of the disk space. It's not the actual like network measurements, but just the stuff monitoring the perfSONAR host. It is capped at a week's worth of data. So assuming all that index state management stuff is working, it should essentially be capped. But I think one helpful thing that probably, we've been working on some documentation even since 5.1. We had a bunch, but one package that I don't think is maybe very prevalent is it's called perfSONAR -dashboards. And I was going to show a screen of that in a second, but it's really helpful, particularly if you're running like an archive with a lot of data. For basically looking at what's going on in OpenSearch in terms of like index sizes and like what's taking up space and all that stuff. It's essentially, if you're familiar with Elasticsearch and Kibana, it's the OpenSearch fork of Kibana, essentially. So I was just going to show you that, and then you can kind of look at the indices. I just need to, so I'm doing a couple things here, just getting some passwords, and then I'll share my screen and kind of show you what that looks like, because I do think that is probably useful for people. Give me 1 second. Okay. Oh wait, that's not right.
I don't have a joke to fill in the gap.
Yeah,
Like,
I know, that's all.
two perfSONAR developers and a router go into a bar, but I can't get any further than that.
It's all right. I'm almost there. Just looking up a password essentially on one of my test hosts here. So even with test hosts, it's not best to share those screens. So. All right, so let me share my screen here. All right, so if you do DNF or apt-get or apt install perfSONAR -dashboards, it'll install this package. And so if you go to the host that you installed on, so this should be like the same host that OpenSearch is running on, so a central archive, or you can even install it on a toolkit. We don't install it on a toolkit or either by default, just because we're trying to limit the number of things we installed. So you do have to kind of run that extra step. But then once you do, if you go to, this is the address of my host. But if you just go to /OpenSearch-, it'll take you to a login page that I just logged into, and then to this. And then you've got actually quite a bit of stuff you can look at. So we were talking about index sizes, so let's just focus on that before I get sidetracked. So if we go to index management, you'll see that this is like a bunch of administrative settings, but like the first thing that loads is like the policies that we install by default for like cleaning out the data over time. So the first one is for like the actual network measurements. This one that starts with Prometheus is actually for the host metrics that I mentioned. But if you want to just like look at the index sizes, we can go to the indices page here. And you'll see there's a bunch of like built-in stuff. One tricky thing is just the way we write indices. You have to like check this box. This is why we need some documentation here on this to see hidden indices. And if we just type in pscheduler, we'll see this particular host. This isn't running a ton of tests or anything, but we'll see kind of all the different kind of indices that have like network measurement data. So you can see like pscheduler_trace, what it sounds like. It has traceroute data. That's throughput data right there. I'm sure if we bury far enough in here, I could probably just search for like latency. Those are going to usually be your biggest, is the latency ones, because you have the most tests. Those are producing results every minute. And, the sizes are going to vary based on what you're actually doing on your host. So you can kind of get a feel for what's eating up space. And yeah, I mean, you can sort all this too, right? So you can sort all that. So that can be kind of a quick helpful hint is, okay, well, what's actually taking up space? Is it these perfSONAR hosts, or like if I were to look at, so this has got host stats coming in from a bunch of different places, or like a bunch of different hosts. So you'll see that's actually much bigger than individually than the other indices we're looking at. But there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them, I guess, and then maybe some older or newer ones. I can't tell, but yeah, those are older ones, probably from some old tests I was doing. But these get rotated out basically. So even though individually they're big, there's only ever 7 of them. So you're good there. So that's helpful to kind of debug this. Now, if you look at this and there's like 100 of these that are all taking up like 7.5 gigabytes, that would imply something is wrong with these policies that I was talking about. And we can kind of help you debug that. It's entirely possible that something got amiss, especially if you've done lots of updates and tested betas and things like that. If things got out of whack in terms of that would be my best guess if that was the case that you ran into. You can also, it might be possible too that maybe just you don't even care about all the host data. So there are ways to like turn that off essentially. Just tell PS config not to grab that, especially if you're grabbing it from different hosts and things like that. So yeah, so this is a useful tool. And then kind of my just brief aside while I'm showing this, just because I think this is generally useful and people don't know about it as much, is if you go back up to this menu, there's this Discover panel. And you can do similar things in Grafana, but I actually think sometimes it's just easier to look at here. If you want to just look at the raw data that perfSONAR is writing out, if you go to this Discover panel, it's pretty good at doing that and just gives you this graph kind of right out of the gate of like, are you getting results? So like sometimes that's what you're debugging. It's like, am I getting data at all? Right. And so this kind of quickly shows you that, and then you can kind of look at the raw records. And a lot of times it helps like rule out display issues or other things like that. It's like you can just kind of zoom right into the data and see like, okay, is what I'm looking for even there, or am I getting anything? And so sometimes that can be useful too with debugging. So this can kind of be a useful tool. So again, perfSONAR-dashboards is the name of the package. If you just app install or DMF install that, you'll be good to go. So I don't know. Is that somewhat helpful, Phil? I don't know if I've shown you this before or not.
No, I haven't seen it, and it is helpful. One of the issues is that I had it on a machine that only had 70 gig for data, and of course I got pretty close to the edge pretty quickly, and so I wanted to move it over to a new machine. I couldn't figure out how to do it, so I had to start with a new set of data. How do you move the data? Is there a way to move the data?
So between Elastic or OpenSearch instances, I think yes, you can. Like you can export data. Well, I know you can. You can do like snapshots and things like that. We don't have any docs on that, and I honestly don't entirely know the process off the top of my head, but I actually think you could do a lot of that through here to like create a snapshot essentially. And then that essentially creates a file that you can then load in to your new instance, and it'll just have all the data. There's probably good links, like probably if we did document this, really what we would do is link to OpenSearch documents about this, because I think if you search like OpenSearch and like snapshots and things like that, they have pretty good documentation on how to do that type of thing. But
That sounds good. I can certainly do that. Great. Thanks.
But that is a good suggestion. I like there's some areas like this that we need to kind of fill in the gaps in documentation, even if it's pointers to other things, because I mean these are common things that people want to do. So
Yeah, I just wonder if there's anything particular to perfSONAR. Do the passwords change if we move to a
even
different
if the
machine?
passwords change, like when you do the new setup, like you do a completely new setup, that should all be fine. None of that's like kept in the data, so like that shouldn't really matter. I think once you do the import, as far as I know, everything should be fine. So
Okay, good.
So, and then I lost my chat screen, so I don't remember what the next question was.
Tell you what, while you're digging that back up, I wanted to address Chris Zane's question about installing the test point on Ubuntu 22.
Sure.
While you were answering Chris's question Phil's question, I went and did a U22 install and it seemed to go okay. So Chris, if you can you let me know, if it's bare metal or a VM or something else.
Yeah, we're running it on a approximate hypervisor, and we just did a Ubuntu 22 container.
Okay. Actually, and to tell the truth, I actually did mine in a Docker container just because I've done that and it works. So
okay.
That's interesting. I'll tell you what, this was probably a good one-on-one debug thing. If you're able to, I take it you're able to reproduce that consistently.
Oh yeah, we tried it like a whole bunch. I
Oh,
can send
okay,
you the
great.
install errors.
That would be great. Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, worst case too, if you have a few minutes after we're done here, I can jump on one-on-one with you and we'll take a look at it.
Okay, yeah, not a big deal. It's one of those, just don't use Ubuntu, use Elm, it works.
There you go.
Thanks.
Sure.
All right. Then for the next set of questions, I actually think they're all kind of adjacent to each other. So I'm going to share my screen again, and I can talk about those that Phil had. So let me share my screen here. So
This could be like OpenSearch too, that the answer is in the Grafana documentation, not in the perfSONAR documentation, which is okay.
I think most of these actually are in the. There probably are ways you can mess with Grafana and make it happen, but I actually think there are perfSONAR ways to do this. So I think these are really good questions. And again, we're kind of probably getting into some stuff that we need to fill in gaps in the documentation, because once you kind of really get down in there, these are the types of things you want to do. So just so if people aren't looking, so there's basically, I think, like 3 questions. Well, there's a third question with kind of 3 parts, and they're all basically around tweaking the Grafana dashboards that get generated in different ways. So one of them is if you have multiple traceroute tests or similar, right? But you want to create like separate, like kind of grids out of the same tests. Like, can you do that?
I just want to change traceroute only looks for one route. I want to set it to 2 routes instead of 1 to have it be green.
Okay, yeah, so that's even just adjusting thresholds. That's even easier.
Yeah.
So what I was going to show you, so basically the equivalent of the old mad dash, what was it, mad dash agent.conf or whatever it was called, where that stuff ultimately got adjusted even if you ran the command, is this Grafana agent.json. So that lives in, I can probably put that in chat here, but that lives in Etsy, perfSONAR, psconfig, and then I think it's Grafana agent.json. We didn't create a command for this just because like it was really kind of messy as a command. It seemed like it was easier to edit the file. Maybe people will disagree, so we can revisit that. But basically in the file it looks like this, and you have this big. Can people see that? Okay, I'm sorry. I can make the text bigger. I think it went the opposite direction. Maybe I can't make it bigger. All right. Anyway, well, hopefully people can see that. So there's this display section. There we go. Okay, sorry, the zoom is being really weird. So there's a display section right here. And so you can do those types of things. So like, let's say we wanted to just adjust the thresholds and didn't want to like, create new versions of these. You can just go in and there's this threshold section. And you just tweak these values and you can adjust the colors as well. And basically the colors are just like the colors, just any like web color essentially. So like Grafana interprets these. So if you put a hex code here, it could be a hex code. You can put stuff like green and super light yellow and red. There's a standard name for these, and I'm like, it's not coming to me at the moment, but you just type that in and that can tweak the colors as well. As the thresholds. And so you'll see these in like all the different tests. So you can probably figure out, so like throughput's bits per second here. So if you want to adjust the yellow bits per second, you can do that. So obviously if you just like take the default file that's there and just adjust the thresholds, that will affect every test. If you only want to affect like some of the grids, right? Like maybe you want this grid to have a different threshold than the default. What you can actually do is like copy and paste this. Like this block, name it something, throughput special or something like that. And then you can go into this task selector. And so right now it's selecting anything that's a test type of throughput. There's a second selector that I don't think there's an example of in this file, but I believe it's called task name. And so you can do task name is, whatever the task is you want to adjust the threshold for, and it can be a list as well. So if there's like multiple of them. And so you can do that and then change the settings, and those will just get applied to the task for that's name. And then if it doesn't match, one of those names, it'll just go back to the default behavior as it was before for your other grids. So I mean, that's just the thresholds. If you want to change any of these other settings as well, for whatever reason, you can do that. So basically all of these kind of control what gets displayed on Grafana. So for example, stat type, there's average, you can change that to max, or if you want to look at a different field, you can do that. This is actually another case where that sometimes if you don't know the fields off the top of your head, again, you can actually look at these in Grafana, but that OpenSearch dashboards page I was showing can also be useful because it does a nice job of showing the raw fields. So you can look at the different results and say, okay, like what actually do I have access to when iPerf spits out stuff, and or like what is it called, the retransmits field or whatever. So you can basically just change this to like result.retransmits. And if you want it to be the max, you change that to max, and then you have a new dashboard that'll get generated for each throughput test that looks at that instead of just average throughput. So likewise, so you had a question in there about the field that gets displayed. So I believe I'm going a little bit. Well, I mean, I know this is mostly correct. So the row field, you could change that. This by default will basically looking at the source and dest as defined in the test spec. I think there's a second setting you can actually do in your JSON file. Have to look at it, that like sets a display name for the host. So I think it defaults to using that if I'm remembering correctly. I'm trying to think if I have an example of that anywhere. I don't know that I do. I might have to get back to you, Phil, on that just to make sure I'm not like making things up in my brain. But I think if you actually go into your psconfig JSON file, I think there's like a meta property for the address that you can set that's like display name, and that'll also, you can change that to something else if you don't want it to display as whatever the default is.
I see. So it's not in the psconfig JSON file itself. It's more in the Grafana stuff to look at.
Yeah, so there's two ways to do it. One is to tweak this, right? But which just looks at how things are defined in the test spec. But I think there's a second way where you could do it, which is probably safer because it's not really affecting the queries as much. Where I think you can set a display name in the addresses section of the psconfig file. I think you can do that. I just don't have an example. I'll have to dig around to make sure I'm not making that up. So
okay, thanks.
And then the sizing, that was actually another thing I wanted to look up. I might have to look that up as well. I think you can actually change some of the sizing parameters in here. It kind of has a default calculation that it does to try and size it correctly. But I don't know that it always gets it. I mean, as you're seeing, I don't think it always gets it right. So I think you can tweak that. That's something I'll have to look up though, because I don't see an example of that in the default file. So I'll need to double check to see if I swear there's some padding settings or something that you can set that give you a little bit more control over that. I mean, the other thing is you can go into Grafana and like drag them, but then the next time the dashboard gets regenerated, it'll just get overwritten. So that's not ideal.
Good. Thanks for all your answers.
Yeah. Okay, so it looks like we've got some more tests that came in. Or more tests, more questions that came in. Kind of feels like a test sometimes.
Yeah, this is like a big quiz for us. Yeah, so Chris and I are going to look at his stuff. I think probably after we're done here because that's really unusual. So if you want to take a break for a minute, I'll take TJ's question.
Okay, and then I'll come back to Daryl's. Yep.
Okay, yeah. So Chris basically asked they're migrating from version 4 to version 5, and had some questions about the architecture. Um, so um, let's see. So let me reread this because I read it 5 minutes ago and then got distracted with something else. Um, let's see. Are there concerns with installing the toolkit across each node? No, so the question is, are there any concerns with installing the toolkit on each node? The answer to that is no. Um, the test point is a little more compact, but given what you said for hosts there, I don't think you're going to have any problem with that. Um, OS recommendations. TJ asked if there's any concerns or recommendations between Ubuntu versus Debian.
Oh, sorry, Mark.
Good.
Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, I meant to say Red Hat RHEL
Oh yeah,
9.
okay, no problem. So basically anything we support, we're happy with. So we've, if you've sort of been following what's going on over the last several years, we have made Debian and Ubuntu kind of first-class citizens, both in our development and our production build processes and all that kind of thing. Largely just because we want to kind of we're starting to try to steer clear of Red Hat's drama, basically.
Mhm.
We will continue to support Red Hat as long as it's viable. One thing I would point out, depending on the level of the of how esoteric you want to run your measurements, Red Hat is starting to take certain congestion control methods out of the kernel. Basically, I think now you just end up with HTCP and I think one or two other things, but it's not as robust on that front as Debian is. So that's kind of one concern. If you're just sort of doing like generic throughput, all that kind of stuff, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Your other questions, you said you had of R640s. Those should be fine. If you're just running 10 gigs, those will do that without breaking a sweat. I actually have a whole fleet of 630s that I run at supercomputing. And let's see, and you asked what the process is for registering your public perfSONAR node. That would be a case of if you install toolkits, then it's relatively easy. You can do that. Let's see, Andy, I guess we can't do that from the web interface anymore, can we? Because we put the
Sorry. So what was?
registering for the lookup service.
Oh yeah, you can still do
Is
that.
that still in there? Okay, I haven't looked at the front end that
Yeah, yeah.
much.
So there's a configuration button still on the top of the
Okay.
on a dashboard, and then it essentially takes you to the.
I need to go install a couple of toolkits and play with them a little bit. I live most of my life kind of deep in the weeds. Alternately, if you install test points, there's a config file that you can edit with all the information in it.
Excellent. And as far as like a central management node for dashboarding, reporting, everything else, like if we deem that node 1 at our border, that will be the main dashboard reporting. They'll be able to pull content, all the reports from our node 2 and node 3. They're not islands, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So usually the way the architecture works, I mean, typically, bigger sites will have kind of a separate machine that's a central MA or central measurement archive. And that's, you don't have to have any special hardware for that. You can run that on a VM if you feel like it. If you've got infrastructure to do that, tends to be a little cheaper. But yeah, you can, if you're going to run a mesh with PS config, for example, you can always all you have to do is just point everything to archive to whatever machine you choose your archive to be.
And that could be any of those 3 nodes as well, as long
Yep.
as there's
Yeah,
space.
or a completely separate VM if you want.
I know this is totally arbitrary, but as far as data retention, and it's all going to be specific to the number of tests and how often you run the tests, but what is a normal recommended starting place for data retention? Say you need a year's worth of data. What does that look like content wise, typically on a small, like 5-10 tests, if they're running every 5 minutes, something like that? Is that something you can
So that is, yeah, that's so sorry. That is something you can control. But by default, all the network measurements get kept for 6 months is
Okay.
the current default policy. You can tweak that. Actually, the easiest way is in that web interface I was showing during the first question. You can actually go in and kind of edit those policies. And just where you see, I think it's, we do it in terms of days, so I think it's 180 days technically. So, change that amount and, and you're good to more or less. So
Okay, thank you.
cool. Well,
Oh, sorry, one other regarding the NIC. I know there's a lot of mention of Intel NICs. I mean, the docs I was looking at were a little dated. But as far as like any concerns with QLogic,
As long as the kernel supports it, it should be fine.
okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, especially, I mean, 10 gigs is not, and the 10 gig stuff is not a stretch by any means for an R640.
Mhm.
So, it shouldn't be any problem at all.
Thank you.
Let's see. Oh, we got a couple
I
more.
can circle back to Daryl's question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I
Yeah,
lost track of
so
where we were.
just share my screen lots today, which is good. So I'm going to share my screen again. So Daryl was asking about traceroute tests, and basically he noted that like on the default displays, you get like a graph of like the number of hops, but he actually wants to see, I think, how the path changes. So can you do that? So I was going to show how I think you can kind of do that now in the current interface. So kind of on the same test host, I was actually helping some folks at just debug a few things a couple days ago. So I was actually have this host pointing at their PS config as well and displaying some results. So they actually have some interesting trace routes going. So if I'm going to click on one of the red ones here, because in this dashboard, that means like there's quite a bit of variation in the number of hops. So we've got lots of interesting paths in theory. So I don't know much about these paths, but they do have lots of hops. So this is like the graph you get. I think the green is like one direction, and then yellow is like the reverse direction of that, the dots. So you'll see sometimes they get as much as 30 hops, like they're all over the map here. But you'll see for, I think, the forward direction, essentially, it boils down to two kind of unique trace route paths. So again, this is just showing kind of the unique trace routes. It's not showing like, hey, this happened at, this particular time. And likewise, it shows the reverse direction here and the list of hops. So one thing you can do if like you're really curious about, and maybe your graphs aren't this all over the place, but if you're like really curious about like, okay, what did I see here, you can actually, probably the easiest way to see like what path happened at a particular time right now, and this might not be ideal, is to zoom in, and you can see things that way. I'm sure there is room for improvement here in terms of figuring out or better displaying like when a path changes and what that change is. We could maybe even explore adding some of that to the tooltip. I don't know.
Okay, so basically I wasn't missing anything here. The list of hops is there in that line below.
Yep, exactly.
That's it, huh? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot more data there. So as I was mentioning earlier, like in this interface, you can look at it in Grafana too. Maybe I should do that actually. Let me go back to Grafana. If you want to look at the raw results, if that is helpful, again, it still might not be ideal. Oh, that's right. It makes you sign in. Actually, give me one second. Where did I have it? Let me see if I can sign in here. So you can actually sign into your dashboard. There's I can copy that in chat too. There's a command you can run to get the Grafana password because it randomly creates one on install. But if you log in to Grafana, you then get some more options in this menu, one of which is Explore. And then you can look at the raw data, which may not be helpful. So to do that, you can actually do raw data or logs. I think I tend to prefer logs as the format. And then it's gonna basically, I gotta click this button. It's gonna give you a bunch of entries down here, like a bunch of raw records. So this is obviously gonna be everything. I'm not expecting you all to remember this, but just kind of to give you a feel for what you can do. These are the different fields, and you can essentially filter on all of them. So test.type is one of them. So if we do test.type, and then for open search reasons, we have to add that keyword. But trace, that should just filter to the trace test. And then you can actually kind of look at like what the they got some weird trace routes that aren't finishing, so we're getting lots of empty results. Here we go. Yeah, there's just one, but you can see the hops. I think there's like ASs to. Okay, this one it doesn't. The AS lookup's not working because they're private. Oh, sorry. A lot of these are my Google. I have some tests between GCP hosts that are in the same data center, so they're super boring. But yeah, if that weren't the case, you could look at ASs and things like that if that's helpful, and you can filter these down further. So again, not ideal, but there are some tools probably at your disposal, and I think probably that's something we should work on with the dashboards is some ways to highlight those better. And with like the training we're doing, if you get comfortable in Grafana and come up with something cool that does that, let us know. Because I mean, that's one nice thing about this setup is that there is flexibility if you are able to kind of get comfortable with it to build new things. So yeah. So sorry, I don't probably have a better answer, but hope that helps.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
And then, okay, so I think the next one is about how can we set up perfSONAR dashboard measurement to key facilities. So I think kind of the main task there is just figuring out. So I guess is the question more about finding the places like the host to test to, or the host and just want to figure out how to set that up.
I think both things. Yep.
Okay.
To set the host and how to find these nodes. Yep.
Yeah. So we do have something called the lookup service where perfSONAR hosts in theory register their existence. So then there is a page. Did I stop sharing my screen? What was I thinking? I'll share my screen again. There is a page to stats.perfsonar.net where you can search for stuff. I'm gonna let that load so you can search for different hosts. And there's basically a lot of different ways to kind of look at it. Right, and this interface is a little bit new, so I need to get used to it as well. So I mean, there's a lot of like reporting information here. I'm gonna as well. Sorry, just waiting for that service locations to load. I don't know why it's being so slow. But anyways, you can filter these down. So like if you know the domain, it's TAC in here. So like if you wanted to look for some TAC hosts, these are obviously, that's interesting. So that one might be okay. So you'll get some things here. The .mac VLAN looks like a Docker container, so that's not a public address. So this can be a starting point sometimes. We set it correctly for es.net. Let me do that. Okay, yeah. So then like if you're looking for ESNet nodes, like in the DOE context, you'll see we have a lot here. It might sometimes be the case, like it's hard to tell, like, okay, like they have ESNet has a bunch of hosts, like which one should I actually be testing to? If it's not obvious to you, it might be the case you still need to reach out to a human to figure out what makes sense. And then once you have the list of hosts, I mean, then it's kind of pretty standard stuff that just plugging it into a psconfig file. I think one kind of common misconception is you don't necessarily need to like have the other people, like if you create your own psconfig file and you're testing to a bunch of external things, you don't necessarily need to have like the other people point at that file. Like you can just have your host kind of kick off all the testing, even the kind of reverse side and things like that. So once you get that list, you can kind of configure your host or set of hosts that you want, and then test the external places, and it should work. But so this is a good starting point to kind of see what's out there, and then yeah, I mean sometimes it's hard to be just kind of reaching out to people to figure out what the right thing to do is if you can figure it out. So like on these two, I believe. Yeah, sorry, I'm not as good around this interface as the old one. We do have administrator info. Oh, maybe we don't put it on this page. Yeah, on the old page there used to be administrator information, so like you could it was helpful for having a contact if you needed one. But
I
don't
think that might
display
be over
that
there if you
info.
roll over the dot on the map.
Okay.
But I don't see a
Of
dot
course,
over
I don't
there.
have any dots on the map, so yeah. Um, but yeah. So anyways, yeah, this is a good starting point.
Okay.
Yeah. So does that answer your question? Or
Yes, yep.
all right.
Okay. I think I'll take Asif's question since that's next on the,
Perfect. Yeah.
so I'll give you a little break. So the Asif's question is about the default limits for perfSONAR 5.1. Sounds like trying to do extended testing with parallel streams and that sort of thing, and they're getting rejected by the limits. So I pasted in a link to the default limits configuration that we ship with the toolkit. But I'm also I'll share my screen here and I'll just point out a couple things. Generally speaking, what we try to do is we try to the tests that originate on the local hosts are usually allowed to do pretty much anything. And we try to set kind of sane but usable defaults for anything else. And what you can do with this, these are not difficult to customize. We actually have a tutorial on setting a limits file up that I did back in 2018, all of which still applies. We haven't changed it that much since. And I'll paste a link to that in the chat as soon as I stop sharing my screen here. But essentially, what you would want to do if you have hosts that you trust where you want to just let them do anything they want, you would add this section here is called identifiers, which is what you use to figure out who's asking to do the measurement. And there is a type, one of the identifier types is IP CIDR list. So what you could do is you could create one of these that says, hosts we like or whatever else you want to call it, and just put in a list of the hosts or the CIDR blocks that you want to allow to do anything. Then you can go down to this section here called classifiers, which is basically used just to group identifiers into categories. So what you could do with this is you could take this friendlies classifier and you could add, if you created another identifier called hosts we like, you could add that to that list, and then those hosts would be identified as friendly also, and then they'd be allowed to do whatever they want. That's kind of the short version of it. And let me, I have it in my cut buffer. Let me, I'm going to paste the link to the YouTube tutorial in Slack or into chat. Sorry, it's me. You have to listen to me drone on for an hour. It's just kind of how those go, I guess. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, cool. And by all means, I mean, if you have further questions, drop a note to the user list, the user email list. If you're not on that or you need information about it, you'll find that on our website.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. You want me to take Wilson's question too?
Yeah, I was actually just looking up a little bit of info on that. So it sounds like basically when you go to that administrative info page that we were kind of talking about earlier and you click save on Ubuntu, you're getting an error that it couldn't save the configuration file. So most likely that's some type of file permissions issue. I was just looking in our backlog just to make sure there wasn't an issue open on that. I wasn't seeing anything. I don't know, Mark, if you remember anything like that.
Yeah. I have a vague memory of something like that. I have to go scour the user
That's kind of
list.
what I was thinking, is that there was something Debian specific related to that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't immediately seeing it, but I wasn't going through closed stuff either. So it's possible it's gotten fixed and maybe just hasn't made its way out yet. But basically, I'm guessing that's a file permissions issue.
Probably.
So basically, there is the file. So Etsy perfSONAR else registration daemon.com. So I was just trying to get logged into a host that I could look at. So I was giving you good information.
Yeah, unfortunately, I just tore down the Ubuntu 22 machine I built earlier.
I have a machine. It sometimes takes a second to get SSH logged in. So
Well, I'll tell you what, while you're doing that, I'll address the first part of Wilson's question
oh,
about what's better supported.
okay.
Officially, the answer is anything that we release in. I mean, we support 100%. So other than things like, right now we're working on getting Ubuntu 24 things ported into Ubuntu 24, and that'll happen soon. I mean, I can tell you personally, I do most of my development on EL9, or actually um, on Alma 9. Sorry, but we're actually kind of fortunate in that most of what we do is not particularly OS specific. When we run into those things, it's mostly either packaging differences or it's kind of stuff way out at the periphery. So I wouldn't really say that any one flavor is any better or worse support wise than the other.
Cool. And then on the LS registration side, just typing into chat. So that's the file that it's trying to write to. So probably one thing would just be to make sure that it's owned by the perfSONAR user and it looks like that. I believe there's a little service that sits in, there is a service that sits in between the web interface and that file. It's possible something is going on there as well. And I'm trying to remember what that log is. I think it's, yeah, put that in chat too. But basically there's a log file that you can look at. Config daemon, right? Yeah. There's a log you can look at that should tell you that. I'm putting that in chat right now. I can find so many windows. All right. So I put that in chat as well. That might be helpful if there's any errors in there. So yeah, so those are a few things to look at to figure out what might be going on there.
And if it's a persistent problem, drop us a line. Often we'll get on and do one-on-one debug with people to see what's going on.
Now that I type config daemon, I swear there's something with Ubuntu and that so Mark and I are not the ones that would be working on that issue. So I think that's why we don't know off the top of our heads, but
yeah,
I feel like I remember this from one of our recent stand-ups. So it might be possible you're hitting a bug.
And our resident Debian and Ubuntu expert is on vacation right now, so
right.
That doesn't help either. So let's see. I think we've kind of covered everything that was stuffed into chat. Chris sent me an email with his error messages, and 10 minutes later sent me another one, said, "Yeah, we did it again and it worked." So I'm going to chalk it up to alpha particles or something.
No, it didn't work, Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I ran it again and it failed. So I sent you everything.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was just looking again. I'm not finding I found an issue from a few years ago that sounds like the problem that was closed back in like 2018, but I'm not finding the issue, so it could be Mark and I just imagining things.
We're hallucinating. Too many perfSONAR vapors will do that to you.
Was there a time when LS daemon was turned off because you were working on the back end and maybe it never got turned back on? And
so that wouldn't actually affect the ability to save it. So that so the LS registration daemon, so that wouldn't happen. So if there's a confusingly enough, there's a config daemon, which is that log I sent for, which is basically the thing that sits between the web interface and any config files it has to touch, which I think these days is the LS registration daemon is about one of the only things it touches. So it's possible something is not quite right with that. If it was a Red Hat box, I would blame SE Linux because we had lots of fun with that daemon in SE Linux, but that shouldn't be a problem on the Ubuntu box. So it could be something else, yeah. But hopefully it's just a simple file permissions thing because that's usually what's going on with that because that daemon doesn't do too much. I mean, it just essentially writes out to that file. So. But yeah, it isn't. I guess the other thing to check would be that config daemon process is running, kind of to your point, Phil. Not the Alice registration one, but the other one. Let me double check the name of that. I think it's perfSONAR config daemon, but need to. Yep, that's it. The name. So I'll put that. Another thing to check.
I have a small question.
Mhm.
For a long time, one of our perfSONAR hosts was on a dashboard. I don't remember the name of the dashboard, but the name of the remote agent was psconfig opensciencegrid.org pub auto psonar7 dash or .final.gov. Anyway, psonar 7 is kaputs and we've replaced it with psonar 10. How do I tell somebody that we've replaced the host?
So probably if they're the ones who like run the mesh, like the central psconfig file, good old fashioned, email or or similar is really the best way.
Yeah, but who? Who do I email?
So
That's a good.
okay, so that's a good question. Like trying to figure out who's testing to your host, essentially.
Yeah.
Which grid was that?
Open Science Grid.
That sounds like a good Sean McKee
Yeah, I was
question.
gonna say that might be just make sure you ping Sean McKee and he can get that updated because he would be the one who ran that. So.
Okay.
I already communicated to Sean, Mickey, and Marian about that. That some of nodes, our Fermi's nodes are not, we are using, we shifted towards newer ones, but still I can see those nodes are listed there. I already sent them the email, but still we can.
Oh,
So
okay.
I've talked to Sean and Marion a couple times in the past weeks. I know, well, Marion and I have been trying to talk the past couple weeks, and I know he's been out actually quite like he's out this week, so that he might be running into that as well because he and I keep missing each other because I was out last week and I think he was out the week before that. So he might just be running into, and then Sean's been traveling a lot, so it might just be a case of that. But yeah, I don't know. But those sound like the right people to me to be reaching out to. So. If I remember, I think I'm gonna probably talk to Mary next week. I'll even just ask him about it. So
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
If I can offer a suggestion for kind of operational practice, one thing that might make this easier is if you use CNAMEs to have to put in the grids, and that way, if your host changes, all you have to do is change where the CNAME points to, and it won't affect the mesh any.
Yeah, but it'd drive me crazy.
Well, that's true. We offer no guarantees on that, unfortunately.
I mean, yeah, name changes are inevitable.
Yeah.
You do it long enough.
Death, taxes, and host name changes.
One additional question other than maybe it's related to perfSONAR, but previously we have meddash, WLCG meddash. Do we have similar type of meddash for the community, WLCG community, or are still?
So that's actually one of the main things I've been talking to Marion about. So he's working on converting that to like the Grafana instance. One thing that's special about the WLCG instance is so they've been writing to an Elastic backend for kind of a really long time. And so which is great because that works with Grafana and all that, but the schema and things are slightly different than like what you do with the default perfSONAR toolkit. So we think we should be able to make that work, but it just requires a little extra kind of elbow grease to get it going. So so basically Sean and Marion are trying to get that moved over, is the plan.
Okay, but other than that, can we create? I also posted here the question that can we create the similar mesh locally? Let's suppose we have here a perfSONAR node, and we wanted to create a similar mesh among our USCMS sites only. So can we create it that? If we can, is there any tutorial for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what you can do is just create a separate file, and there's the psconfig remote add command that you run when you add a mesh. Just run that again. You can point at multiple meshes, and so if you have some host pointing at the main WLCG one and a CMS specific one, you can do that and they'll run the tests. If you have your own Grafana instance, you can point at that CMS one. You can actually also point at the WLCG one now, and it'll just reach out. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that because that's a special one. But in general, if it was a normal OpenSearch instance, you could do that. Yeah, you basically just point at that file. I mean, I think the best I can share kind of the full Grafana setting up a central archive tutorial. I can share that link. That's a good way to get started. And then probably looking at examples in terms of building that central JSON file is probably the best way to go. It's got a couple links in there. Yeah. Or you mentioned on the web page, I mean, that'll just affect one host. You can also kind of add some tests on just that host. But if you have multiple hosts to manage, it's probably best just to kind of generate your own JSON file and point the host at that using the psconfig remote add command. But let me pull up that doc for you. That kind of walks through the Grafana setup and pointing things at the mesh and all that.
Okay, thanks.
All right, anything else?
I think Wilson had a follow on.
Oh, I missed that. Oh, I think I was conflating his tests, or his question.
Oh,
so okay. So yeah, so when adding tests, what files? So you're right, it is updating the file. I would not recommend editing that file because the current webadmin is a little weird. It actually like writes out to a different format and then converts to the file that it creates. But I can let me just grab that path for you in case you are curious.
or adventurous.
Yeah, or adventurous. Just have way too many windows open. Here we go. So I like to double check this before just like typing out the file paths and in the chat like from memory because I always get it wrong when I do that. So it is oh I obviously haven't set up any webadmin tests on this. So it's in this direct. I'll share the directory. It's probably the only file you have in there. So in the directory I just put in chat, there should be a file. I think it's like GUITest.conf or something like that. You'll see it. It's probably the only file that you have in that directory, but inside that directory is the file that ultimately the web interface is generating that has your tests. So actually, I think there's a page on the docs that has that too. But well, any other questions or anything else we missed? Oh, what should the owner's permissions on it be? So it should be, I believe it should be owned by the perfSONAR user. And I think it's standard 644. I don't think we have to do anything special for that in terms of like Apache, but it should be the perfSONAR, and then yeah, 644 should be the permissions. Okay, anything else?
I think since we're at the top of the hour, I will mention that the next of these will be on Friday, November 8th, at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, and appreciate all the questions today. I mean, we filled up, kind of flew by. We filled that up easily. So
I sort of figured it was going to be quiet because everybody was going to be on vacation.
Yep. So no, that was nice. It's actually always nice to have things to talk about. So appreciate everybody bringing their questions. And yeah, I think all three of these have been really good. So yeah,
Tell a friend.
keep these going.
All right. Well, thank you, Andy and Mark. And as a reminder, like they said at the top of the hour, there will be a session at TechX in December. I'll make sure I put the link to that in the mail that I send out with the link to the recording. So hope everybody got their questions answered. Otherwise, you know how to find perfSONAR. You just email perfSONAR user, and hopefully somebody will answer. We're not going to have another call, a CING call, for a while. I think the next one is September 20th, and it'll be a talk about NetSage. So hope everybody has a good rest of your summer, and we'll talk to everybody soon.
That's good.
Wow.
Thanks, Jason.
All right. Thanks, you guys.